So as we just heard, President Lee Jae Myung is now in Washington for a summit with President Donald Trump. For more on this, we're joined by Professor Andrew Millard, Assistant Professor of International Relations at Changwon National University. Professor Millard, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So this will be President Lee's first summit with U.S. President Donald Trump. How significant is the visit and what might be on the agenda?
So you're right. This is going to be very significant because, as it was just mentioned earlier in the news broadcast, this is the first face-to-face meeting between President Lee and President Trump. And here, this is really where we start to build this personal relation between the two leaders. And this is very important because this will now set the tone for the relationship between the US and South Korea over the next 3 or 4 years. So it's very important that President Lee goes to America with a lot of confidence, well prepared, and that he's able to discuss several things on the agenda. When President Lee took office a couple of months ago, really it was trade and tariffs and security that were the two main issues. Obviously, a couple of weeks ago, we had this trade and tariffs deal almost completed. So now really it's going to be security issues and again, maybe looking into what was discussed in that deal. So maybe agriculture, shipbuilding, automobiles, and of course, Donald Trump's current favorite, the Alaska pipeline, which South Korea promised to spend about $100 billion on importing natural gas from there.
Right, as you just mentioned, a lot of focus will be on security issues, particularly the burden sharing issue for U.S. troops stationed in Korea. And that's expected to be a key task for President Lee, especially as the Trump administration has been pressuring Seoul to pay more. And President Lee actually said on his way to Washington that it's difficult for South Korea to agree on the flexibility of U.S. forces Korea. How do you think this issue will likely play out?
Right. So I think this is really going to be the key issue of this trip to America. As I said, the trade and tariffs, to a degree, they're pretty much already completed. So now the focus really will be on security issues. And it's going to be a few different areas. So as you mentioned, it will be the cost burden sharing between Korea and America. Now, Korea currently pays the US about $1 billion annually to have those US forces in Korea. We know Donald Trump has been pushing for an increase up to $5 to $10 billion. Now, whether that's likely, I do not know. I don't think it is. But also in terms of general defense spending, South Korea currently pays about 3.5% of its GDP on defense, which is pretty high, especially when you compare that with NATO allies in Europe. That's a relatively high figure, but Donald Trump wants that increase to at least 5%. So there's a lot of room for negotiation on the figures, how much South Korea can pay more to America. But then there's also the other issues of nuclear capabilities. So there's a lot of talk in South Korea at the moment about the South Koreans being able to enrich their own uranium for industrial purposes. Now, under the 123 agreement, which was updated in 2015, this is not allowed. So there's going to be several different issues related to security that could be discussed in this meeting.
Right, absolutely. And before heading to Washington, President Lee also met with Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba to discuss trilateral cooperation among South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. And Prime Minister Ishiba reportedly also shared his experience negotiating with President Donald Trump. How might that help Seoul in its negotiations in any way?
So there's a few things to look at here. The first one is, again, this visit means that now President Lee can go and visit Donald Trump and say, oh, look, South Korea and Japan, we have a very strong relationship. Over the past few years, maybe it hasn't been that strong, but now he can go and say, South Korea, US, Japan, trilateral security agreement, this is in a very strong position. So he can go with this very good news, but also on a more personal note, he can give President Lee a lot of sort of private information about how these meetings take place. And definitely what we've seen with President Trump is these Oval Office meetings, these are not standard meetings between leaders. This is into the Oval Office, not just a private meeting with the leadership, but also with a huge press grouping as well, asking a lot of questions. It's really much more of a show. So I think Prime Minister Ishiba will have given a lot of very good advice on how Lee can prepare for these styles of meetings that are going to take place. So I think really a very important meeting. But we should also remember when Ishiba visited in February, this was a very early part of Donald Trump's second term in office. Donald Trump has been growing in confidence, so maybe there will be some changes as well.
Right, I guess we'll have to see how the summit on Monday will play out. All right, Professor Miller, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.